everybody, I'm Beebs Kelley. Welcome to the Netflix series. So if you didn't know, Harry and Meghan did a whole entire fictitious series with Netflix that they tried really hard to make look like a nonfiction sort of docuseries. Even Meghan said there's a difference between a scripted sort of a show and a historical docuseries. Well, similar to Spare, the Netflix show is a show. It is definitely not a docuseries. It is so far from nonfiction, I can't even. Just like Spare was. Spare should have been in the fiction section because it was so full of lies, opinions, exaggerations, not factual, okay? I feel very strongly about this, that nonfiction needs to be very clearly nonfiction. Facts, things that would hold up in the court of law or scientific research sorts of things, studies, evidence. Really, if nonfiction isn't that, then what is it? What do we have if we don't have a clear definition and very clear boundaries on what can be called nonfiction? So for me, that is probably the biggest bone I have to pick with Spare. If I had to pick just one thing as the biggest issue with it, is that they packaged it as a nonfiction book. Just like they did with this Netflix series, they packaged it like a nonfiction thing. And there was a lot of slick manipulation throughout, like putting text messages up on the screen as if they're the real actual text messages or emails or correspondence, when they're not. It's just somebody putting it into a graphic, creating the graphics and typing it up on screen. It's not the actual evidence of these things, but they implied that it was. That's just something on principle that I find to be very problematic beyond the content itself, simply on the basis of these aren't actual facts and you're trying to present them like they are facts. Big problem. But today we're going to go through and summarize the first portion of the Netflix series. This series will be kind of long on my channel here. It'll be coming out in the coming days this week because I don't want to be making super long videos. It will be boring. Nobody has time for super long videos. So I'm breaking it into a bunch of little parts. So be sure you're subscribed so you do not miss. And I will also put them into a playlist just like I did for the Oprah interview, which I'll link for you guys up here as well. So lots of dramatic piano, lots of over-the-top drama all throughout this series. Really, they pushed it really hard. The dramatic piano itself is just so emotional. And Meghan and Harry start the series by declaring that it is their duty to fight the media, which raises questions of what exactly the problem was. What was the problem that Harry and Meghan had with the media? Of course, there was some unsavory articles published, but all celebrities and public figures have unsavory articles published about them. My goodness, even just the political season we just went through had so much mudslinging in the media. Not necessarily, well, I guess from the candidates too, but anyway. The media went crazy over it and there was so much trash published. Just saying. So the press has always had an element to it where things get just completely off the rails. But in general, Meghan and Harry's press coverage was very, very fair. And all the people who paid attention to it and all the people who research it now and look back agree. Harry and Meghan didn't have unfair, over-the-top negative press coverage. It wasn't. It was very much based on what they were doing and what was going on and very factual and rooted in just normal, run-of-the-mill press. But that also raises the question of hypocrisy, because now Harry and Meghan use the media to talk negatively about things and to spread their misinformation all of the time, including this series itself. It would be very different, a very different story, if Harry and Meghan didn't engage with the media like they do. If we didn't have Oprah, the Cut interview, the Variety interview, which we just did a big series on. I'll link that for you as well. Spare, all the little TV spots and interviews, the Jane Pauley stuff, all these little sources close to the Sussexes leaking things all the time, which is really Harry and Meghan, we have found out, and calling the paparazzi to let them know where they are. If Harry and Meghan didn't do all of those things, this wouldn't come across as hypocritical that they want to fight the media and have more privacy. But because they do use the media for their own gains and manipulate the media and manipulate narratives and lie all the time in the media and push that misinformation out there, then we can't really take what Harry and Meghan say when it comes to wanting to campaign against the media and it's their duty to do this. We can't take that seriously because it's not. What they really want is censored or filtered coverage. They want only positive coverage. Harry has always taken it really personally that people didn't receive Meghan the way he wanted them to and thought that forcing it down people's throats would be the right way. And Meghan has always been very offended that her coverage wasn't glowing and that she wasn't revered as Diana 2.0. And so that combination has created these vendettas that are very ill-advised and haven't gone well for the Sussexes.
Prince William or Prince Harry? I don't know. Harry. Harry? Sure.
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 What year was that? October 2015. October 2015?
Less than a year.
Before we met? Honey, I'm sorry. I of course choose you.
Okay. This just, again, shows how little you knew.
This clip highlights a major theme throughout the whole Netflix series, which we'll talk more about in our final video on this series. We'll talk more about the themes that they were trying to really drive home and the purpose of the Netflix series. But the theme they really want people to get is the Meg was totally not aware of the royal family at all. She is completely clueless. So much so that every time Meghan makes a statement that only she and Harry believe, that comes across as completely contrived and acting, bad acting, Harry gives this smirk to the camera like, see, she didn't know anything. It's so ridiculous. It has been disproven by friends, family, and just general media stuff, like Meghan herself, certain outfits, certain angles, certain things that she says, and the certain approaches she takes to things. She's slipped up. She did know a lot about the royal family, obviously. So all of this, I wasn't aware of anything, is foolish and pointless. We've moved past it. We already know she knew. The second big theme they try to focus on is their love story. We're doing a whole separate video on this whole love story PR mistake. It was one big mistake.
Why did you want to make this documentary?
I'm not going to say that it's comfortable, but when you feel like people haven't gotten any sense of who you are for so long, it's really nice to just be able to have the opportunity to let people have a bit more of a glimpse into what's happened and also who we are.
So why make a documentary series here? Meghan gives a non-answer that it's not comfortable. What a weird way to answer that question, but it's also clearly a very self-indulgent reason. She wants to tell people about herself. Now, on the face of it, that's not so bad. But if she would have just said that they wanted to find a way to connect with people that felt more genuine to themselves, or that was easier for them because it was hard to do so in public-facing engagements and then just have everything covered by the press, that they wanted to do something themselves so that people could learn more about them and their family, fine. At least you're being honest about it and not trying to mask it as something that you're forced to do or feel like you have to do, because we know it was all Meg's idea. The third theme that really runs through this whole series is this misinformation thread, which, as I alluded to in the intro to this video, doesn't hold up because Harry and Meghan push in misinformation all the time.
We've been really conscious of protecting our kids as best as we can and also understanding the role that they play in this really historical family.
As a dad and as parents, I think consent is a really key piece to this. That if you have children, it should be your consent as to what you share.
I found it interesting that Meghan Markle used this phrase about the children's role in the family without the children's consent to be part of it, because part of what she talks about and says makes it seem like she wants to be sure that Or at least she alludes to that the kids shouldn't just be thrust into these situations, and why would you want them to with how much you've talked about how toxic it was, but doesn't give them the opportunity to choose that for themselves.
My life, books are written about our story from people who I don't know. Does it make more sense to hear our story from us?
This has been proven false. Meghan did know a lot of the people who were writing about her and did participate. Like, she had to apologize to a court of law, to a judge, for conveniently forgetting that she did provide information to Omid Scobie and was in communication with him. She gave Omid Scobie stories to put in his book, and then she lied about it to the courts, and they said, what about this evidence of you talking to Omid Scobie? And she said, whoops, sorry. So that's just a straight up lie. And hearing the story from us really just is code for hearing our manipulated, exaggerated, twisted narrative that is not 100% fact. That's what that means.
I had my path, then came age. I mean, he literally, talk about a plot twist.
I don't know that I would categorize that as a plot twist so much as exactly what Meghan intended to do. And I think that that's her error here. She tries to push this narrative so hard rather than just being honest or staying away from it entirely. Look, it's obvious Meghan did do quite a bit of curation and prep to get into this relationship and situation with Harry. And because of this, she has an insecurity about it that comes out in statements like these. She would do much better to just steer clear of talking about the relationship and how she came to know Harry and how she came to be around him and all of that stuff. She would do better to steer clear of it altogether, because these sorts of things, trying to pretend like it was unexpected, just nobody believes it because it's not true, and you can tell in the way she delivers this that that's not true.
Meghan and I met over Instagram. I was scrolling through my feed, and someone who was a friend had this video of the two of them. It was like a Snapchat.
Oh gosh, isn't that whole thing? It starts like with dog ears.
Dog ears.
That's what he saw of me.
That was the first thing. I was like, who is that?
This is ridiculous.
Here we have yet another version of how they met. This is different from previous versions, highlighting the problem with doing so much talking and sharing about one's self and not being fully honest about it. Because then you lose track of what you said, you're giving out different versions all the time, and all people can come to the conclusion of is that you are lying. And if you lie about little innocuous things like how you met and your first date and how, what you wore that day, if you can lie about those things, then you'll lie about anything.
I said, who is it? And she said, it's Prince Has. And I said, who's that? I asked if I could see his feed. Here's the thing, when people say, did you Google him? No. But that's your homework. You're like, look, let me see what they're about in their feed. Not what someone else says about them, but what they are putting out about themselves.
Here we have the Meg's list come into play. This is a clap back to her on Oprah saying that she didn't Google Harry at all. She never researched her husband online. She swatted that away real swiftly. I've never looked my husband up online. Well, Instagram is online. And so she's backtracking here, but there's holes in the story. Instagram is online. Instagram is looking someone up. It's the same thing. So this is giving Amber Heard. Next, a series of texts or emails flash on screen, giving the impression of a documentary or validity where there isn't. It's not a documentary. This is not evidence. This is not giving validity to what they're saying at all. This is all just manufactured for the purpose of the show. And it's a really manipulative tactic that I think, as I already touched on, is unethical, especially if you're going to talk about misinformation at the same time. As episode 1 progresses, it does feel very contrived, especially claims like them being childlike with one another. If that is true, great. But to put it in a video claiming it to be the best love story ever that really needs to be told to the world is a huge mistake. It just comes across as really full of yourself and opens yourself up to an embellished sort of vibe. People just think you're embellishing the story, or you just think this would be a great thing to say. If it really is that way, then it's visible in how you interact with your spouse. It doesn't need to be declared in this manner.
That was when it just hit me. I was like, okay, this girl, this woman is amazing. beautiful, and she's so comfortable and so relaxed in my company.
He had a list, apparently, of what he was looking for.
Let's not go there.
An extensive list.
Or a few things on that list.
I'm not showing the list. Good, nice try. This is the list.
Good answer.
Okay, so Harry had a list. Now, this makes the case for privacy and keeping things private and not doing something like a Netflix series at all, because these sorts of things should be private and stay private. To have your partner divulge something in this manner to this big of a stage that they know you're not comfortable with talking about is so wrong. It's just not okay. It's a very stressful experience and a definite power play. Why Meghan Markle brought this up is probably because she felt like it fed her ego a little bit, like I matched all the things on his list or something like that. But Harry wasn't comfortable with this concept being out there. Also, he seems like the petulant type to think that he's entitled enough to even have a list.
For so many people in the family, especially obviously the men, there can be a temptation or an urge to marry someone who would fit the mold, as opposed to somebody who you perhaps are destined to be with. The difference between making decisions with your head or your heart. And my mum certainly made most of her decisions, if not all of them, from her heart. And I am my mother's son.
This was seen as a direct and very unkind dig at Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, because who else would they be talking about? There's no other possible person that Harry would be talking about here in this moment. Diana did fit the mold for Charles, and he did have pressure to marry her, but then they divorced. And so I don't think he was necessarily talking about that, because then he went on to marry Camilla, who he obviously felt like was a soulmate for him, and they're very happy and have been married for a long time. So clearly, most people interpreted this as a really petty, unnecessary dig at Catherine and William, who are literally the picture of a happy couple. Most of the time when they're around one another, they're giggling, they're making each other feel relaxed and happy and comfortable and looking like they're having a good time. They support each other, they're there for each other, they have a close-knit family unit. I mean, this just doesn't fit and feels almost like this other theme that we'll talk about later on in this series, that a lot of this comes across as Harry and Meghan's insecurities about their own life, that Harry realizes that he was trying to get somebody that he thought would fit the mold in Meghan, and because he rushed it and because of the way things played out, turns out she didn't fit the mold at all, and it ended up a big disaster. And that insecurity might just be where this is coming from.
The majority of my memories are of being swarmed by paparazzi.
Harry's claim that the majority of his memories are being swarmed by paparazzi is ridiculous and just makes no sense. He also says at other points that he doesn't have many memories from his early childhood, in part because losing his mother was traumatic at the age of, 11 or 12? And so it would be natural in some ways to stifle some of those early childhood memories. So this just comes across as a little bit conflicting to some of his other statements and just not very true. Factual, not very factual. Also, him being advised not to react is kind of duh factor here. Obviously, you shouldn't react to every single thing all of the time. You shouldn't react to paparazzi. You shouldn't react to those things. It does make it worse. And all public figures, politicians, and celebrities do have to learn that lesson. It just is. And when discussing paparazzi and photographers and whatnot, he neglects to detail the laws that have since been implemented. For viewers who are unaware, it's quite irresponsible to leave out these important details that laws since have been changed, or the detail that he always conveniently forgets to mention, that Princess Diana declined to keep palace security after her divorce, and that was a contributing factor to the problems that she had. Harry then compares his spouse to Catherine, Princess of Wales, and other females in the family in terms of level of interest in her, which really demonstrates a key issue here, that he perceives Meghan to be on the same level when she is not. She never has been, she never would be, because Harry was not the one who was going to be king. And we saw this play out. While there was media attention on Fergie, for example, when she was marrying into the family with Prince Andrew, or Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, when she was marrying Prince Edward, marrying into the family, there was media attention, sure, but nowhere near the level on somebody who is going to one day be queen, consort, or queen. And Harry seems to lack the understanding of this and the perspective on it. And I can understand that's a challenging dynamic, and that's totally its own can of worms. But ultimately, like, he does need to come to grips with the fact that he and whomever he were to marry would never be getting the same level of interest as somebody who was going to one day be queen. It just wasn't. It wasn't going to happen. And he doesn't get that. Still doesn't get it. Then Harry starts comparing Meghan to his mother, which he earlier had mentioned, like I said, a lack of memories with Princess Diana, with his mother, which is sad. But if he doesn't remember much, then how can he be comparing Meghan to her? Doesn't make sense. And this really ultimately feels really sad because of all the context that we now know. He has conflated these two ideas and people and images. He has blurred the line, which isn't healthy, but also isn't really fair to Meghan either, positioning her to live up to this idea of somebody who Harry unfortunately doesn't have a very clear image and memory of, because he only knew his mother when he was so young. And yes, that is tragic and heartbreaking and very sad to think. But at the same time, of course, naturally, he views his mother on this pedestal in these rose-colored glasses, and it's just his memory that he has. And it should be sacred and left to be, and he should hold on to that as strongly as he can. But conflating that with Meghan and putting standards on her is not acceptable for her. We saw a really healthy alternative to this with Prince William and Catherine and their engagement interview. I'll link the video for you. He had an excellent response in terms of comparing Catherine, who is now the Princess of Wales, to his mother Diana. He had a great, perfect response that Catherine was going to have her own role and she wasn't trying to fill anybody's shoes, and she was her own person and going to have her own identity. And that really quashed that constant drawing similarities out of thin air. That just didn't happen with Catherine because they squashed it immediately, made it very clear that's not what's happening. Harry and Meghan, and yes, a lot of it's through Meghan's encouragement, but looking at it from this other perspective of Harry putting that expectation on her and that sort of standard to her and her feeding it back to him is just a very toxic dynamic, very, very messy indeed. I personally would feel extremely anxious constantly hearing Harry say things like, history will repeat itself. I'm afraid history will repeat itself. I'd be like, stop. Why are you trying to bring it about? Knock it off. I don't think it's good for Harry to be constantly fixating on these anxieties. And while I do think it's exaggerated and irrational and at times contrived, it's also sad. And sad that Meghan doesn't reassure him and put a stop to the nonsense. Instead, she feeds into it. He laments about the funeral, and honestly, I have always thought that looking back as an adult, he would regret it far more had he not walked with the other men in the family following Diana's coffin during the funeral. I think he would regret that in retrospect much, much more than participating in it and it being challenging. He also claims to not have much help or support or guidance after the death of his mom, which is very misleading. As we know, he had a huge family. He has even acknowledged how big his family is, and he had all the resources that other people who lose a parent don't. So, nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And taking this position really didn't garner him any sympathy. In fact, the opposite happened because some people actually do have no one. This is a mistake on his part for taking this approach as if it was so terrible and hard without acknowledging that it was still a lot easier than it was for other people who maybe are also dealing with poverty or who don't have another parent and end up having no parents at all. Things like that. Like, just not thinking in a broader perspective here. Also included in this episode, he reflects positively on his time in Lesotho, but neglects to credit his family for being the ones to send him there and give him the opportunity to do any of that. And then it's back to more cringe about Harry and Meghan's trip to Botswana together early in the relationship, her secret visits to the UK, very intent on talking about how secretive it was and had to be, kind of like this element of like, oh, it was so special because it had to be kept so secret. Again, this is over the top. We're not talking about a future queen here. Episode 1 ends with previewing the media coverage, which was very much sensationalized in this series, in this TV series, as compared to how it was in real life. A lot of the times they do undermine their point by showing positive response, but at the same time, they don't show a balanced view of how the publicity was at the time and how things were going at the time. It's very, very unbalanced. It's like they cherry-picked only the negative things that were very kind of fringe, but that's like media these days. There's always fringe stuff that's a little bit out of whack and away from the norm. But that concludes episode 1. Be sure to subscribe so you do not miss the upcoming videos. I'll be putting them out all week long for you in this series on the Netflix show. Thank you so much for joining me. I will see you next time. Have a happy day, everybody. Bye.